Right now. Stop. How about now? About now? You gotta go to the mic. Zoom. Oh, right here.
Okay, we might as well get started. Is that me? Hello? That is me. Call the meeting today to order. Will you do a roll call?
Tom McDonald. Len Titi.
Here.
Jennifer Finley. Here. Jim Molitor. Carol Langford. Terry Pitts. Bing Matt. Ellie Bundy. Martin Charlo.
Present.
Mike Dolson.
I'm here.
James Steele Senior.
Thanks, Jen. Start us out with a prayer. Jennifer, would you do the honors and lead us in a prayer? Thank you.
Today I ask for blessings on all of our hearts as we put forward our our best intentions for the work that we do for our people. All the people that we know and all the people that we don't know, who rely on us to be strong, who rely on us to be good, who rely on us to have integrity. And I ask blessings on people who feel forgotten and people who feel lost and people who feel like they don't belong. That somehow our work reaches those people. Lemlemsh.
Lemlip Jennifer. Okay, you have minutes from June 8th for your consideration.
Mr. Chairman,
Ed Lynn?
on the very first issue where we talked about, the policy waiver, I would like the name removed and just put a tribal member. Where it says Len Tucci gave an update on the request from a tribal member.
All right, thank you. Motion by Ellie to approve the June 8th council minutes with corrections. Second by Mike. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Five, four, two abstaining, Tom and Jennifer. We have our agenda for today. Is there any additional items? Jen, 2 walk-ins? Okay. Martin, you have anything? No?
Yeah, maybe a quick one and open.
Okay. Anybody else? Any additions? Okay, Jen.
I have one issue. What to do in open.
Okay. All right. We have 2 walk-ins and 3 agenda items added. I would entertain a motion by Martin to approve today's agenda with additions, seconded by Mike. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all's in favor? Unanimous? Okay, we could take our, go ahead, Jen.
Your first walk-in will be Erica Shelby. She's on Zoom.
Okay, hi Erica.
Kisukwisnam Kapineskit Hesquak Specia. Good morning, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your time today. I'm here on behalf of the Micah Matters movement, serving as MMIW advocate for the family of Micah Westwolf, a 22-year-old Indigenous woman who was murdered on the highway March 31st in the early morning hours. We'd first like to humbly request your presence at any portion of the walk. We'll begin today right after we get out of council, and we'll continue until Friday when we plan on getting to the Lake County Courthouse around 1 p.m. We'll do some speeches from the family, as well as an honor song and some other things up there. We're finding some pretty disturbing systemic patterns of abuse from several agencies, and the mother of the decedent, Carissa Heavy Runner, would like to use some of the attention that she's drawn and some of the momentum to be able to highlight and spotlight these other cases that we've discovered in this process. There's numerous cases that parallel her daughter's. And at this time, I'd like to introduce the council to Mother Carissa Heavy Runner.
Hello,
Good morning.
morning.
Condolences to you and your family.
Thank you. How are you guys today?
Well, we're here and we're praying for everybody and wish you the best in your endeavors. So
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to share my daughter's story and also shed light on some of the other families that lost their loved ones with similar accidents and help bring awareness, because I believe that the world needs to hear, you know, the problems that we deal with on a daily basis. And I'm just glad that, you know, these families trust me to help share their story where they can be seen and heard and can hopefully help start some healing in the process of being seen and heard and sharing their story. So yeah, we would like to invite you guys to join us or meet us on the side of the road when we walk by, and appreciate all the support. Oh, and here is my dad, George Heavy Runner, who wanted to say a quick thing.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for providing us a little time, and to also we're glad that we're hosting this event on your reservation. Bring you greetings from the Blackfeet tribe. Had some discussions with our chairman, Scott Kipp, and besides the walks, we have discussed of the need for the tribal leaderships in Montana to consider requesting through the Senate Select Committee on Indian Affairs to have a field hearing out here. We need to start to bring it to another level, to have some discussions of what's working and not working in terms of coordination between federal, state, and tribal agencies. Well, what are the strengths and the weaknesses? And I think that venue provides formal testimony, and I believe it also, when you have them, it reaches out and it ascertains about what type of potential resources that maybe at the congressional level they could provide. So I would hope when the time comes and when our tribe wants to work at this level in terms of a letter to Senator Tester, I believe he would be the conduit to work with the chairman on the select committee to see if they would consider that sometime in the near future. And I think this will bring further light to this issue that happens not only on this reservation, but at home, and I'm sure on the other reservations, as justice just seems to go away. But whether people in those agencies don't want to have the time, don't want to deal with it, it just seems that once again, it seems like they put tape over our mouths, and we cannot support our people. So as we are in this grieving process, we are in this process to try to get equal justice under the law. That's why Lady Justice has a blindfold on. She doesn't look at the color of your skin. It's just to uphold the rule of law, and it's important for that to happen. And so I just thank you for this time, and I hope you would consider that. And if there's some dialogue that our chairman can reach out to you in regards to making this formal request, I think that would probably be an opportunity at your level as tribal leaders to help us in this effort. Thank you.
Thank you, George. We'll try to do as much as we can in regard to that. We'll take that under advisement and see what we can do. Yeah, so again, sorry for your loss.
I also had a request, Mr. Chairman. When we get out the vote, which is extremely important to me, elections, we give time off with supervisor approval, up to 2 hours for our employees to vote. We'll be coming through Pablo Thursday, and I'm wondering if we can get an hour off with supervisor approval for the tribal employees to walk with us through Pablo.
We can take that under advisement. We'll have a discussion on that today. Let's see what we
Okay.
can, Erica.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you for your time.
You bet. Thank you.
Your next walk-in is Andrea Thomas.
Andrea, come on up. Good morning.
I'm not sure if this needs going to executive or not, so.
Well, let's be safe and move into executive. Okay. Martin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple things. Just wanted to thank council for supporting the Zootown Open last week. Last weekend, I guess. Really great event. We did get a shout out on the Disc Golf Network, saying that we were the first tribe to support a sanctioned event like that. And so they acknowledged our homelands and kind of wasn't the best pronunciation of our names, but you know, because I've heard worse. So wanted to thank you guys for that. And then on Juneteenth, I was asked to give a welcome and a land acknowledgement at Fort Missoula for an event they're doing. And so just letting you guys know you're more than welcome to come. I'll let you guys know the details. I've seen I was told conflicting things in what the poster says, so I want to make sure that I'll give you guys the correct times. So but I don't think I have anything else.
Cool. Thank you. I'm glad that we're the first tribe to support a disc golf event. Good reminder, Monday's a holiday. So it'll be our first, we do a second year, right? We made it officially on our calendar, so it's permanent. Third? Last year, okay. All right, okay. Jennifer?
Thanks, Chairman. I guess a couple things. I just wanted to give an update for the record about my time at the NCAI mid-year conference in Minneapolis. NCI paid for my registration and my hotel because I'm on the executive committee. And so I presented a resolution on transboundary mining, a cause that our tribe has been a part of, and it passed through the subcommittee and the regular committee. And because we didn't have a quorum, it'll have to go to the executive team to vote on it, but I anticipate that it will be approved. That resolution will be approved. And then I was able to tour a recycling facility that the Shakapees own. And I think it would be beneficial for us to think about doing something similar someday, to have a recycling facility that's tribally run. And the second thing I wanted to bring up is a request from a tribal descendant. She is an artist and she created a large art piece that's going to be part of the Montana Meth Project Paint the State contest. And she would like to install it at the Ronan Tribal Senior Center. And she said that her hope is that her art will impact someone and help reduce the amount of meth use on the reservation. So I think she said it's a permanent, she's looking for a permanent place. So I think it'll be a billboard. Um, so she's just asking to use that space.
It's an outside
Mhm.
art exhibit.
Yep, and it's an outside art piece for the Montana Meth Project.
Have you seen it?
Yes, I could forward it to you.
You
Or can
think-
I do screen sharing? I don't know how to do screen sharing.
I don't know. Mike? As long as there's nothing,
Do you know how I do screen sharing on Zoom? I've never screen shared before. Mike,
Right down here.
this
You got
one?
the picture up, yeah, click that and it should show you screens and click that, and it says yeah.
Okay.
oh, that's quite a piece you did.
It's just way too long.
Yeah.
Was good to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, any concerns with council?
Nope, I support it.
We probably should make sure Lands is aware, or
Oh, yeah.
so that way Louis not tearing it down.
I don't know. See all those cherry signs that are popping up all the time. I keep taking them down there at Ravalli. Consensus? Go ahead.
Yep.
Okay.
And
Let
I'll
her-
let Louis know.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Louis or Tara? Yeah, either one.
Okay.
I think Tara does billboard permits, but
Yeah, and her name is Shauna Croft and she's a first generation CSKT descendant.
okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right, Len? You have an item?
Mr. Chairman, I was just going to address administrative leave for employees to participate in the MMIW activities going on this week, but it sounds like, Eric's already made that request, so we'll just address hers and
I would support a motion, Len, to that effect. And maybe do it in each town. Like, cause they're having stops each day and I believe St. Ignatius, Pablo, Final Day Polson. And so allowing them, like, say 2 hours per day or something to participate, or in that vicinities or something.
that'd be, yeah, that would work better for the employees if we were to allow them 2 hours a day for this week.
Just gotta put the wording in there.
Okay, I'd make the motion to grant employees 2 hours administrative leave with supervisor's approval to partake in the MMIW activities this week. And that would be 2 hours per day.
I mean, the only thing is MMIP now, but second.
Motion by Len, second by Martin. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Show of hands. Unanimous?
All right,
Thank you.
thank you all.
Okay, next we have Mr. Lozo. You on Zooming? Huh?
You can go to John if you want.
Okay. Let's do John. Come on back up. Was I jokes? Come on back up. Just
Morning, Chad.
Morning.
morning.
Well, we're here today to, get the okay. We're looking for the approval for the roofing contract for SKMM to go ahead. Everything's all set in place for total price of $964,870. That's 17 roofs, throughout the reservation. It starts here at the complex. Folsom Tribal Health, Social Services over here. Kicking Horse, we have the fitness center, preservation, the maintenance shop. In Central Mail, Hot Springs, we have the tribal health. Ronan, we have the safety of dams, the water management, tribal health. Harley, we have the senior center and, Head Starts, we have PC, Ronan District Office, Cherry Valley, Tuipa, and Growing Words. Those are the roofs we're planning on working on.
I got a question. What about the Elmo Tribal Health and the Elmo Head Start building? Were those included? Are they going to be included? Can we include those?
They will be in, on the next go around. These are the ones with, serious leaks.
Is that a serious leak over there?
That's not.
The one back there? Any other questions or discussion? Motion by Martin to approve the contract for the roofs. Second by Mike. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, show of hands. Unanimous? Okay. Get out there.
Easily the least you've heard me talk.
I want to see you up on a roof.
Hey, John, Mr. Chairman,
Yeah,
I
go
would
ahead.
time we're going to executive with John and Tony.
Okay. Come on up, Tony. Come on up, Mr. Lozo. Good. Good. The sun shines out there. Pitts brought it this morning. Failed us yesterday, but came through today.
50% all the time. So good morning. So today I have a bid acceptance for a hand piling contract located in Rive and Hot Springs. This is where our forest development crew are piling with their machines. It's a little too rocky and a little too steep in some areas. So we're gonna go ahead and advertise for a hand piling contract. In the past, we had some work done over in Welcome Springs. I think in October, I came in and got one approved. So this is on 595 acres total. It's part of our compact money, BIA money, so. Just look at, the lowest bid, we had 3 bids come through, with Coldwater Reforestation, Glacier Cone Company, and Escalante Reforestation. We're just requesting the low bid of $600 an acre with Coldwater Reforestation.
Martin,
Motion to approve the low bid with Coldwater Restoration, or Reforestation.
motion by Martin to approve accepting the low bid for Coldwater Reforestation. Question, go ahead, Len.
Where is this company out of, James?
So they're out of Missoula. They do kind of like some same thing, just piling and stuff like that, just reforestation.
Yeah, have we worked with them in the past?
No, we haven't.
Second by Len. Any further discussion? Go ahead, Terry.
We didn't have any tribal member interested or,
Glacier Cone Company, so that was about it. It was advertised, papers, as well as Indian preference.
Any other questions or discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, show of hands. Six, four, one opposed, Terry. All right, motion passed.
Yep.
Thank you.
Oh, and then just let you guys know, so we had, last week, had a short one, not advertising, talk about of some contracts that we got. National Forest Foundation, like we came back in October, so the greenhouse funding is, I think it's up to 750 now, so we're on that next stage of the tier 2 is what I'd call it. And then in August, we are having a Northwestern Regional tour with some of the Colville as well. So they're gonna come over and then we might send a couple over there as well. So but we'll keep you updated with that if you guys are around. I'd like to have you guys out there in the greenhouse with kind of show you around.
Or are we gonna start bidding out hand piling now?
Yeah, I mean, it's something out there. I mean, we've expressed it before, you know, with our permittees, you know, I've talked with Tony before about opening that up to have them thin that units as well, kind of give them a little extra on the side. That's something that I want to revisit as well with our thinning crew.
Okay, yeah, I would like to look at some options on how we can, start getting more tribal members involved in it.
Sure.
Rather than having to, form a LLC or a company, just look at some other options where we get them to participate. Because not everybody can come up with bonds,
But
things like that. I know there's a lot of people out there that enjoy that kind of work, especially,
yeah, so definitely with the smaller units, probably definitely try to set some aside.
all right, thanks, James.
Thank you.
Ellie, just a second, James.
James, so on the sale information, it says total area treated 595, $600 an acre, and then it says 375. I think it should be 357.
Oh, okay, yep. Just fast fingers, I apologize. I'll get a new one to you guys.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, NRD's up next. It's like bison range stuff. Those rascally bison are spreading weeds around, are they?
Good morning, Council. We have in the room Peter Bagoni. He's our range and wildlife ecologist at the Bison Range. And then I believe Shannon was headed on his way down too. And we've got a proposal that I'll let Peter kind of explain a bit here. And I was just looking through the agenda pages. Were you guys all able to receive the grant as well, or just the resolution there to look at?
Just the resolution.
Okay, so I will share my screen and pull up the proposal so that I can kind of walk through that as Peter's going through it. So I'll go ahead and share my screen and turn it over to you. Thanks, Peter.
Good morning, Council. Thank you for your time. So we're applying for a grant through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It's a tribal wildlife grant. And with this grant, we're proposing to look at some of the interactions between bison herbivory and plant communities at the Bison Range, as well as annual invasive grasses and soil carbon storage. And so we're hoping to explore those interactions with this study that we're proposing to go on for 3 years. In the mechanism for funding, what we'd like to do is GPS collar some select matriarchal bison to kind of understand their patterns of herbivory around the Bison Range. Once we can kind of understand their movement patterns, then we can understand a little bit more about how they're using the vegetation at the Bison Range. With that, we want to conduct some baseline vegetation surveys at the Bison Range and get a better view of what the plant community is like at the Bison Range, because we really don't have that view right now. So we'll incorporate that. And then in addition to that, we also are going to partner with the University of Montana, who has a really robust spatial modeling for annual invasive grasses, particularly ventonata and cheatgrass. And they've already trained this model at the Bison Range in the past, and they want to come up and train this model again. So what this model allows them to do is to be able to, with about 80% accuracy, predict where ventonata is at the Bison Range, which is obviously, with ground truthing, extremely helpful. So what we can kind of do is quantify the area of invasion understand how bison are interacting with that invasion, and then also predict where invasion might happen so that we can kind of start to protect those intact plant communities that we do have at the bison range. On top of that, we know that bison play a key role in sequestering carbon in the ecosystem, just in the way that they graze, the way that they select for plants. And so we want to also kind of understand trends in soil carbon accumulation at the bison range. And so we want to understand kind of trend, which is a 3-year view, kind of looking long ways. And then we want to understand mass, which is kind of understanding actual accumulation of carbon. And, you know, with considering factors of climate change, you know, understanding how carbon gets sequestered in the climate, in a plant community, and especially with bison, are essentially important. I really consider this to be foundational data sets that we can share pretty broadly across a lot of different entities, other reservations, other tribes, NGOs, other agencies, because there's a large push to restore bison, but there's not really an understanding of what that restoration looks like in terms of their interaction with plant communities. So I feel like we can really lead the way with this study by developing these foundational data sets. Carrie has the budget there in front of you. In total, we're going to ask for $143,572.34 from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So hopefully that explains that fairly well.
So how many are you going to call her? And how do you make that selection? Is that like one per family group or what?
Yeah, that's approximately in talking with Shannon, and he has a much deeper understanding of bison than I do. But you know, we're going to call her approximately 16. That's what I wrote for in the grant. And these would be like the lead cows of each family group, essentially. Yeah.
Any questions? All right. I would entertain a motion to approve the grant resolution. Motion by Ellie, second by Jennifer. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, show of hands. Unanimous.
All right.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, thank you
Carrie.
for your time.
Thank you very much, Council. Have a good day.
You too. Carbon credits for Buffalo. Let's get on that, Shannon. Carbon credits for Buffalo. Okay, let's go green.
Liz is up next.
Great. Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me today. I'm Liz Sullivan, and I am joining on behalf of the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission to tell you a little bit about a public safety advertising campaign we have planned for this summer. So if I might be able to share my screen, I actually have a few slides just to walk through the campaign and give you some more insight into what we have planned. All right. All right. So as I mentioned, I come to you on behalf of the Consumer Product Safety Commission, which is an independent federal regulatory agency with a mission to save lives and keep us all safe by reducing unreasonable risk associated with products. You might be more familiar with CPSC as they hit the headlines a lot related to product recalls, but really half of their mission is also to teach Americans how to interact safely with products. This year, CPSC is planning a campaign to help inform Native American households of common hazards and to provide guidance that can keep them safe. The campaign will include both billboard and radio advertising in Montana and across Indian countries. So as I mentioned just a minute ago, I would love to share a little more about the planning for this campaign and gain any feedback you might have about it. So our plans began with census data that tells us where we have the largest populations of Native Americans, and we have focused our planning in those counties and zip codes across Indian country. In sort of broad strokes, this map indicates where we intend to have billboard locations, with about half of them on tribal land represented by the purple balloons, and then half, a little less than half in blue, which represents placements that aren't technically on tribal land, but that are in areas of high population. More specifically in Montana, this is just a zoom in on that previous map to show you where we intend to have billboard placements. These will be in Rosebud Hill, Roosevelt, Glacier, Lake, and Blaine counties, and our planned placement dates for the billboards are July 18th through October 17th, although they may stay up a little longer if the vendor does not have the space sold. In terms of radio coverage, we expect our ad spots to be carried on national Native news and Native American calling shows, which are both on Native Voice One network. It's worth noting that most of the radio advertising will be concentrated in Hawaii and Alaska, since neither of those states permit billboard advertising, but these two shows and this station has affiliates throughout the United States, so we will have coverage in Montana. So this is just a more specific list of which stations and dials and cities will be picked up by the affiliate stations, so you can, expect that our spots may appear on any of these. In terms of what our campaign will say, what we will address, we have used data to guide us to 2 priority safety areas for this campaign. The first is baby safety, and we know that Native Americans experience the highest SIDS rates of any racial or ethnic group nationwide. So our first billboard speaks directly to that risk. It says safe and sound means no pillows, toys, or blankets around. Learn more about sleep safety at cpsc.gov. The radio scripts for baby safety are meant to be a companion to that same messaging. The script itself will be the close, so it will open. The spot will open with a voiceover by the host. This traffic report is sponsored by the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission. In the middle, we'll have a traffic or weather update. And then the close will be one of 2 versions. The first we're considering is, did you know that Bear is best when it comes to your baby's sleep? Use a fitted sheet only and lay them on their backs for sweeter, safer dreams. The second version, nobody likes a crowded highway. A crowded crib is even worse. For a safe night's sleep, be sure there are no toys, blankets, or pillows around your baby. For the spots that have 30 seconds, we'll also have a call to action at the end of our radio spots that are essentially a learn more at cpsc.gov. We intend for the voiceover of these ad spots to be executed by a man named Boy Ladd, who you may be familiar with. He's a member of Ho-Chunk Nation, and an MC, is known, I think, for his role as an MC at many powwows. The second area of safety that we have prioritized is carbon monoxide safety. And this really has a lot to do with climate change. I think we all are aware that severe storms are on the rise. And when we have these storms roll through, they often cause power outages, which leads people to find other sources of power, whether it's portable generators or burning coal or using the stovetop for heat. Any of these things are possible. And when done incorrectly or unsafely, they can cause carbon monoxide poisoning, which can kill a family in minutes. This billboard says carbon monoxide can kill in minutes. Install a CO alarm, save lives. Learn more at cpsc.gov. The companion radio spot, again, same format where it opens with the traffic report sponsored by the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission. In the middle, we'll have whatever the content of the traffic or weather update is. And then one of two closings. The first says, don't let a silent killer inside your home. Carbon monoxide can't be seen or smelled and can kill in minutes. Protect your family with CO alarms. The second would say, is your tank empty? There's another gas you should be worried about. Carbon monoxide can kill in minutes. Stay safe by placing CO alarms in your home. All right, so that's my my preview of the campaign. I would love to hear any feedback you all might have, any questions you might have. You know, I think really we just want to make this effort as successful and impactful as possible.
And I will also introduce myself. I'm Patty Davis. I am the main spokesperson for the Consumer Product Safety Commission, who's working with Liz on this. So yeah, we'd love to get your feedback and your thoughts.
And Patty, any comments from council?
And I know a tribal family that had their kids up front, but in the back of their truck with a canopy on. When they finally stopped wherever they were traveling, the dogs were all dead. Contributor too.
And I think it's always a good idea to remind people of things like this. You know, safety issues. I think it's wonderful. I'm just wondering, do we have any tribal programs that provide free CO2?
Are you referring to the alarms specifically?
I think back in the early days of Mission Valley Power, we did when they first came out. They provided some free ones. Liz, so
Thank you all very much for your time.
thank you. Thank you, Patty.
Take care.
You too. Really? That's amazing. James, it's like herding cats. Oh, you know, still. Team right here. Four team right here. The championship team. It's the Denver Nuggets right here.
Session, and I know that the county commissioners are exploring and reevaluating our arrangement to provide for state prosecution here on the reservation. It appears that we're going to continue our experiment a little bit longer at least, and at our last public meeting, the sheriff and I advocated for maintaining status quo, and that's where we are today. So with all of that kind of behind us, I wanted to come in and just tell you a little bit about some of the things we're working on and where we're at over at the county, and offer my assistance with anything that you all are working on in the public safety sphere. We're currently up to 209 felony cases for the year, so that puts us on pace for a little over 400, maybe 450 by the time the year's done. Our drug court is fully staffed and running very well. Judge Molly Owen took over for Judge Manley and stepped into those shoes and has kept that program running very well. It's my understanding that the tribal court system is trying to put together their own family treatment court. I've had some discussions with licensed addiction counselors that are working in that area, and offered my assistance in any way to either help refer people to those programs or work with them if they're in those programs and have state cases that they need to get sorted out. So I'm always open to working across jurisdictions to help do drug rehabilitation right, help get people straight and sober. Let's see. Rolling up our sleeves and sitting down and actually starting in on that. Step one is going to be finding a Microsoft Word version of it, because I think all we have are photocopied pieces of paper at this point. Somebody might have to just retype the whole thing. Sorry.
All right, Shane, that's your job. Retype the whole thing.
Dealing with juvenile populations, the difference between intervening in a kid's life when they're 15, 16 years old, if we can jump on that and do something quick to help get them straightened out, I think that does them a real service. Sometimes in the adult court system, things tend to just really drag out. And that's one thing if you're dealing with a 35-year-old, but when we're dealing with a 16-year-old, there's a real opportunity to capitalize on that when they're young. So we have a system currently where we, when we encounter a juvenile, any law enforcement agency, and we have any reason to believe that they might be a tribal member, we refer that to tribal youth court to have them vet whether that person is or isn't a tribal member. And if they aren't, then they send them back to the state. And if they are, then tribal youth court gets first crack at them. And for a variety of reasons, sometimes tribal youth court feels that they've exhausted their options and they refer those cases to the state. And then Barbara Monaco and I take the lead on it. Sometimes the state court system has more resources available to us. We've got more placement options. And ultimately we can send juveniles to Pine Hills, unfortunately, when that's necessary. So trying to work on streamlining that process and making it a little bit more clear. In particular, there's a short list of crimes that we charge juveniles as adults for. Homicide, burglary, rape, that type of thing. And the retrocession agreement doesn't adequately address whether or not that's a youth court case or an adult felony case when I file that. So I just wanted to get that ironed out. We've had a couple of instances with a aggravated burglary that caused some confusion. I think some people over at Tribal Youth Court felt that they should get first dibs on that, and I ended up filing that directly into adult court because of the seriousness of the offense. And we might have got a little sideways with each other for a minute there, but I think we've got that sorted out. But I'd like to get that sort of codified in the retrocession agreement while it's up for renewal. I've been coordinating with your prosecutor's office pretty regularly. There's Emily, who's quite the go-getter, and we email quite regularly about whether I'm going to be taking this case or would it work better for them to take it. There's a lot of room to cooperate and coordinate when it comes to drug cases in particular and drug paraphernalia cases. So I think we're getting better at that, and I see some room for improvement. And the more we build those relationships, the better outcomes we're going to have. You've got, or addressing anything that you've got any concerns about, if there's anything I can tell you, or
for James.
Your involvement with us and really doing it in a positive way, and also all your involvement within the community is always good to see someone like you out there and practicing what they preach. So I guess we're just in a hurry up and wait mode, and probably more questions figuring out what happens in the next couple of weeks, right? So with PL 280 and everything, but yeah, I think we're all going in the same direction, just maybe a different path.
thank you for that. I don't expect we're going to have any major news on the PL 280 front anytime too soon. Our lawsuit against the state was scheduled for a jury trial in December. So we're hoping that if there is an opportunity to have a settlement in that matter, it's going to happen this year. We're trying to accelerate that and get some determination. The commissioners really just want an answer about who's supposed to pay for these things. Become quite the financial burden on the county. Through a lot of conversations we've had with the state and working with the legislature on this, I can tell you that I get asked frequently, well, why don't you ask the tribes for money? And I very deliberately and regularly have said the tribes are already paying probably around $5 million a year into criminal justice costs, prosecution courts, law enforcement, jails, probation services, and emphasize that you're spending a lot of money here too. So I don't want to put that back on you at all.
To advocate for the tribes to have the same rights and responsibilities and governing authority as states do. We wouldn't have this problem at all. Shane?
Mr. Chairman, council members, also want to just thank James for coming today. I know he's been trying to make sure that he does this more often with the council to check in. And so for this particular visit, what I did is we talked a little bit beforehand, gave him some thoughts just that I had for things for him to cover, which he's covered most of that information, and then had reached out to Ann Miller, Malin Smith, and Craig just to see if they had any thoughts. And so some of the information that James has went through is just in follow-up from some of those questions primarily from Malin and Ann Miller.
Your questions or comments for James? I just want to echo, what Martin said, and what Shane just said. I mean, it's relationships are really critical in how we work together, communicate, cooperate, as much as possible. So that's a key to success in any governing authority or any management of any people or resources. It's really critical. And so you do practice what you preach, and I really appreciate that. More so than you can imagine. I guess the one thing that it's out of your bandwidth, I guess, in some regards, but I always found it interesting when I think about funding government. We fund our government through the money we raise in corporate revenue and provide services all the time to people who aren't specifically citizens of our tribes, and bear those costs. And we do that with great respect and wanting to do that. And so there's that help fund county government. I always thought it was interesting when I owned my first house in Ronan, and I was paying about $2,000 in property taxes. And here was this person that was a multi-millionaire. In a home that was the equivalent of the cost of 2 city blocks full of homes in Ronan. Per orchard. And they're paying $320 a year in property taxes. And getting the full force and benefit of all the services that the county government, state government, tribal government provide. That there's something not right here, and if I was to try to fix, revenue generation for taxation, at least in this area, I'd be focusing on those folks that I believe, and they're not even, majority of them aren't even residents of Montana. They're not voting people or anything. And just seems like a huge misjustice, or, it's just not equitable as far as the way property taxes are assessed. And that was one way if I was a county commissioner. I don't know how that's state law you have to fix, but I'd certainly go after it some way, shape, or form. But that would help with some of the funding of, they truly benefit from the law enforcement for their mega mansions, and they're not paying their equal weight. For someone whose income is $25,000 a year and has a home in Ronan or Charlotte or whatever, and they're subsidizing that mansion in their stuff. So I would look at something like that as a potential for me, but I tell the county commissioners that.
I appreciate that. I think that's squarely in the legislature and Helena's hands, but how we approach funding our government and how we approach providing services, I think, is always fascinating. That we want everyone to pitch in and pay their fair share, and we want to provide services to everyone regardless of where they're at. I've thought up a whole system in my head for retired folks. I think that when people reach a certain age and they own their own house and they it's not a mansion, it would be nice for them knowing that they're going to be on a fixed income for the rest of their life, to have some guarantee that their property taxes aren't going to go up by more than a certain percentage per year, you know, for the first $500,000 in value of a primary residence, let's say. But yeah, that's all hell in a theory. But I do appreciate the entrepreneurial spirit of the tribes and the way that you raise money and the way that you spread it throughout the valley and share that with your membership, with tribal members who aren't members of these tribes, and with people who aren't tribal members. There's a lot of benefits that the tribes bring to this valley that they share with non-tribal members that I think are oftentimes overlooked.
Any other comments? Questions for James? All right. Well, thank you for coming in.
Thank you very
Appreciate
much. Look forward to seeing you again soon. If there's anything I can do to help any of you all, or if you have constituents that are voicing concerns, my door is always open. You can get in touch with me. Just call my office, send me an email, find me on Facebook. I'm here to help, and I'm your county attorney too.
Executive. On up to the table. Yep. Come on up, Casey. Morning. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's wonderful to be here. I think most of you know, I'm Steve Lozar's favorite son.
Well, you're not gonna say best looking?
Best looking. If we can get that on the meeting minutes, that'd make me feel good with my brothers. No, it's wonderful to be here. And just wanted to thank each of you for your time to allow for Heather, who I think you all know Heather as well, but she can introduce herself, for us to come and provide a little bit of an update of what we're working on at the Federal Reserve, at the Center for Indian Country Development. We've had a significant amount of progress and change and growth at our center. And we've got a major project that we're embarking on that we wanted to talk to CSKT about participating in. So with that, you should all have a packet, and there's a wealth of information in the packet that talks a little bit more about, one, the Federal Reserve, as well as our Center for Indian Country Development, in the project that we're working on, which is called the Survey of Native Nations. And we're just going to walk through a little bit of a presentation, and certainly feel free to ask any questions that you might have for Heather and I. And then we really want to get into a little bit deeper into the Survey of Native Nations. Before we do that, maybe I'll hand it over to Heather to introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having us here today. My name is Heather Sobrepena. I'm the engagement director for the Center for Indian Country Development. Prior to that, I was with the Montana Department of Commerce for several years, which is where I've probably met a few of you through the State Tribal Economic Development Commission. I'm a member of the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe out of South Dakota, as well as an Apsalica or Crow descendant here in Montana. So very happy to be here again, and thank you for making time for us on your agenda today. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Casey.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Heather. And like I said, we're going to just walk through a presentation, and you have the printouts in your packet as well. So as part of the Federal Reserve System, we always need to make sure that we have a disclaimer that anything that we say are our own opinions and not those of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis or the Federal Reserve System. So I just wanted to start a little bit high level because I know I haven't had the opportunity in my new role at the Federal Reserve to talk a little bit about the center. I know I've met several of the council members around the country at different national tribal organizations where we've had the opportunity to speak, but wanted to talk about and position the center in this sort of broader ecosystem of tribal organizations that are working on behalf of tribes to support economic development. So the Federal Reserve, which is often kind of misunderstood, is essentially the banker's bank. The Fed is not a bank where you go and you have your own deposit accounts or checking accounts. We're really the banker's bank that is charged with payment services and supervising and regulating banks around the country. And then probably what you're most familiar with is the monetary policy work that we do. You think about some of our previous chairs, Alan Greenspan and Janet Yellen, and currently we have Jay Powell, and them and the presidents of the 12 different reserve banks around the country set monetary policies. So set our interest rates that help stabilize America's economy and ultimately the global economy. Each of the reserve banks, sort of work together on supervising banks, and we all have a slightly different mission, although rowing towards the same goals. And the Minneapolis Fed's mission is to pursue an economy that works for all of us. And we cannot meet that goal without focusing on Indian country. And so the Minneapolis Fed has committed considerable resources to establish the Center for Indian Country Development, which was established now 8 years ago. And we're quickly expanding our efforts and our impact and adding value to Indian country. On slide 4, we talk a little bit about our mission and vision that the center has. Really, we do as a national research and policy institute, we're here to advance economic self-determination of tribes through data and research. Our data and research is all positioned around topics that are policy rich. So we hope that in our data and data analysis, it informs policymakers at tribal council levels, at state houses, and certainly out in DC. And we believe that that Indian country economies can be more resilient and more robust. And we're here to support tribes as they're thinking about sort of how to expand and how to diversify both the economy that is managed by tribal commercial operations as well as the private sector. in tribal communities around the country. We focus on, like, we have 5 pillars of our work. And certainly when you think about economic development in Indian country, there's tons of different areas where you could focus. We're focusing our research and our policy and our engagement on these 5 areas. The first is really on optimizing tribal tax authority. And you know this well. We've never relinquished our taxing authority as tribes. Yet our tax receipts across the country, across Indian country, are very, very small, though we don't know what the size of those. And that's some of the work that we want to be able to tackle, to understand what are we missing out on as tribes in terms of tax and the complications of dual taxation. We've done a significant amount of work on understanding the unique role of tribal enterprises all around the country, and what they do for employment, what they do for revenue production for tribes, and ultimately those resources, as we know here in our home community, allow tribal council to deliver public goods to our members and to our communities. So we've done a lot of work on understanding tribal enterprises. As a Federal Reserve, certainly we're interested in capital and access to capital and supporting of businesses. So we have a range of different research projects that we've done in publications and data analyses that we've done around what makes for a strong business environment for tribal communities. The 4th bucket that we work on is understanding sort of financing programs, particularly at the federal level, and tax credit programs. A lot of these initiatives, either through Treasury or Interior or other federal agencies, are either designed thinking about Indian country or have forgotten about Indian country. And we have done significant amount of analysis on some of these programs, getting through data sharing agreements with federal agencies to understand whether or not these programs are accessible in Indian country. And if not, what are the opportunities for change? And then lastly, we're working on a broad portfolio of work on economic infrastructure, really with a focus on broadband. Broadband is so key to everything that we do in Indian country. And I think we all know that accessibility to high-speed internet is not available in many of our tribal communities. It's particularly expensive in our communities, and it's unreliable. And so we're conducting research to understand why and what can be done about making sure that tribal families have access, and tribal organizations, tribal colleges, et cetera, have access to broadband in meaningful ways. Just about a year and a half ago, the Federal Reserve announced a major expansion of the Center for Indian Country Development, and it was really driven by 2 things that we hear from tribal leaders all the time around the country. And that is, we need more data to make data-informed decisions. And then we need to do that in a way that honors and allows tribes to exercise tribal data sovereignty. And this major data initiative that we've expanded the center around really is about trying to close the significant data gaps that exist in Indian country. I think you guys are all aware that oftentimes tribes are called asterisk nation, because if you look at a lot of data sets, oftentimes we're just not there, or we're at the very bottom of a data set that says, with an asterisk that says not sufficient sample size for American Indian Alaska Natives. And that makes it particularly challenging to make good public policy. And we're trying to close that gap by doing a couple different things. One, by accessing public data and packaging it in ways that make it more accessible for decision makers like you all. So you can see on slide 6, we've developed a number of different data tools that are available to folks from around the country that allow for you to use data in your decision making to understand sort of economic conditions in your community and all across Indian country. So we've developed a funding and finance atlas that we encourage you to take a look at, where we've gotten a considerable amount of data from the federal agencies, and we designed a tool to map that across all of Indian country, across all the different tribal communities in the United States, where you can go into this tool and identify, have you had any new market tax credits delivered to your community? Do you have any financial services or native CDFIs in your community? Has SBA been providing loans in your community, et cetera? The list goes on. So you can get a sense of what is coming into your community and what is not. We've also developed a Native American financial institutions map where you can look at all, both tribal leaders as well as business, tribal citizens who have businesses, to look at where these financial institutions are and some of the data that are associated with them. We've also developed a really cool labor market dashboard, the first that's ever been developed in the country, where every month we can tell you, and you can see on this dashboard, what the unemployment rates, labor force participation rates, et cetera, are for American Indian Alaska Natives. And when we did this, census would not publish any data on American Indian Alaska Natives through the monthly jobs report, and now they do it after we created this. We've got a series of reservation profiles that provides publicly available data across reservations around the country. Particularly helpful, we get thousands of hits on that every month, particularly from tribal practitioners and economic developers who are putting in grants for additional resources. And then lastly, we're developing a data set around all of the tribally owned enterprises, both tribes and Alaska Native corporations and Native Hawaiian organizations, and all their enterprises and how they're contributing to state, local, and national economy. All of this is designed to allow for data to tell an accurate story about the economic narrative in Indian country, something that is a bit of a challenge, particularly for policymakers that don't understand our tribal communities. And we're bringing data to the table to help write that story in meaningful ways. I wanted to just jump maybe to slide 8, and you can see in slide 8, we're not doing this alone. We take counsel and we take advice from the Center for Indian Country Development's Leadership Council, which you can see is made up of 16 members from around the country. These are, many of them are sort of Indian Country all-stars that have a lot of experience in finance and economic development and in academia, and they help counsel us on sort of the key research projects that we take on behalf of tribes, as well as they've been particularly key in ensuring that as a center, we are in everything that we do, we're protecting the data that tribes share with the Center for Indian Country Development. And I might just note one thing, that Heather and I's email ends with .org. And that's particularly important. It does not end in .gov because we work at the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. We are a nonprofit corporation. We're sort of quasi-government, but we are not government officials, which is particularly important as it relates to our ability to protect confidential tribal data. And it's one of the things that has propelled folks to share data with us and ensure that we can do high-level analysis that is meaningful to tribal communities. And the last thing I wanted to mention with regard to our team, we've grown from, I think when I started in the position 3 years ago, there were 3 of us, and now we have 20 plus folks that represent 3 different teams, a research team that we have economists and research assistants and research interns. We've got a policy team that is focusing on taking research and developing ideas around policy options for policy change that might impact economic development in Indian country in positive ways. And then we have an engagement team that Heather leads that is making sure that anything that we take on is coming directly from Indian country. I was told an anecdote a couple of years ago that I'm particularly proud of, because I think the Federal Reserve is not well known. And an individual from Indian country said, it's so wonderful to see that the Federal Reserve's ivory tower goes down to the ground. And I think that says a lot about what we're trying to accomplish. We don't just do things that are cool. We do data and policy and analysis research on things that truly matter from Indian country. And that's all a bit of a tee up to a major project that we're getting ready to kick off, starting here in Montana, a project that is really bent around ensuring that that tribes control, again, the economic story, the economic narrative of their contributions, both to our tribal communities, but certainly beyond. So with that, I'll turn it over to Heather to talk a little bit about the Survey of Native Nations. Perhaps before I do that, are there any questions from any members of the council about the center, the Fed's work?
Questions? Of course I do. This has been, Casey, it's been on my radar for years. And it has to do with, in my discipline, previously before I retired in Fish and Wildlife, distribution of federal excise taxes on sporting good equipment, that type of stuff, and how Indian country is not eligible for that. We pay the taxes, the users come to our landscape, and it's part of when you think about Montana and outdoor settings and the number of reservations there are, including ours in the foremost front. How come we don't have access to that funding? Because that's economic development. My dad was on the Federal Reserve, whatever committee for a little bit there, and had a meeting up at his cabin on the lake, and I gave a presentation on Flathead Lake fisheries management. We were doing Flathead Lake fisheries management, but yet we don't have access to that tax revenue that's generated from the licensing and the user group on that lake. We don't have that. It goes to the state if they apply for it. And so that is a tremendous tool and access funding for us to be able to develop tourism, to be able to manage our resources in an appropriate way and have economic development. So are you looking at all the federal laws that are not equitable to Indian country? Because it goes to federal aid in sports fishing, federal aid in wildlife, land and water conservation, U.S. Coast Guard funding, the Clean Vessel Act, it goes on and on and on. There, we don't have access to that funding where states and other entities do, even U.S. territories do. So that to me would be something that I think you might be interested in, at least looking into or providing something insight to that. But I've brought it forward so much in my career that really haven't gotten anywhere with it.
Mr. Chair, that's a great comment and a wonderful question. I think maybe at the very foundation of the question is understanding where resources or where revenues are flowing into Indian country or not flowing in Indian country, and understanding why. And really at the heart of the Survey of Native Nations that Heather is going to talk about is getting to the foundation of understanding through data where that gap actually is. And we feel like there is a way to address even specifically the excise tax question that you have in the Survey of Native Nations, where we can compare, again, we're starting this survey, which will be go all across Indian country, but starting at Montana, where we should be able to identify what taxes are being collected by tribes versus local government versus state government. So you can tell the story of, look, excess taxes for us, even though we have not relinquished that authority, is zero. And perhaps for
it's federal. It's all federal. It's not local or state. It's federal.
Yeah, or we can compare it to some of the tax receipts collected on certain taxes by the federal government as well.
It's like land and water. It's offshore oil and gas revenues that come back to states. And so I don't know how you actually get into that information, because Indian tribes do not qualify for land and water conservation funding. The only way they qualify through it is to go through a state to get the money back to them.
That's right. So I do think there is a way to be able to collect and analyze the data and compare across different government units to understand sort of where that disconnect is. And for our perspective is understanding where the opportunity is, particularly for tribes across a whole range of different sort of revenue sources. Questions?
Excellent, thank you. Great. Casey briefly touched on sort of describing some of looking into where revenues are not flowing into Indian country. So essentially, the Survey of Native Nations pilot is a project that looks at revenues as well as expenditures for tribes. And the idea is that we will pilot this in Montana over this summer and then through the end of 2023 to do some analysis as well as reporting back out to tribes. So there actually have been previous data initiatives with tribal governments in Montana. Some of you are probably somewhat familiar with these reports. These are the front page cover of the monetary contributions of reservations to the state of Montana. That was prepared by Eleanor Yellowrobe with the Bureau of Business and Economic Research at the University of Montana. She did this in 2007. It was published in 2007. It looked at 2003 revenues. And then there was a more robust report that was done with the Department of Commerce. The first one was done with the Department of Commerce as well. It was done with the State Tribal Economic Development Commission. And then the Department of Commerce actually got a tranche of funding from EDA and was able to do a bigger project to look at a larger time period from 2003 to 2009. And so how tribes have been able to use this report is to take it to legislature to advocate for a fair allocation of funding of state resources, by saying, you know, tribes actually contribute billions of dollars every year to the state's economy. So there is precedence for these kinds of data initiatives. And so I just wanted to share that with folks to kind of set the stage for what this might, what the Survey of Native Nations might look like. And as Casey mentioned, in his introduction of the Survey of Native Nations, one of the critical sort of calls to action that we've had from tribal leaders who are looking at our research and policy and data chops and our capabilities is to be able to look at data that tribes can make decisions from, and in comparison to other governments, in comparison to similarly sized communities, as well as how services flow out to populations. So at the Center for Indian Country Development, we actually started to look into, well, how can we do this? How can we actually take something from our experience when we worked for the Department of Commerce, something similar to the monetary contributions report or the reservation economic assessment profiles, and turn that into something that we could do at a national level. So we developed a survey. And the idea of the survey is really to advance a data-driven narrative, or really an economic narrative that tribes and tribal governments can tell about their contributions to local, regional, and national economies. And it's really a way to, you know, when we think about what the value it can provide, it's a way where tribes can identify opportunities for growth, the diversification. It's a way that they can compare to an aggregate of other governments in terms of, you know, how do we measure up? And it also, I think, in terms of the economic narrative, can really demonstrate the unique delivery of public goods and services by tribal governments to their communities and really to their regions. Actually, a census out there. It's called the Census of Governments, and it's performed by the U.S. Census Bureau. It's performed twice in a decade in the years ending in 2 and in 7. It is actually the most comprehensive source of information about state and local government from a national all the way down to a local level. It looks at the scope and nature of the local government sector. So you can really see how big or small governments are and compare those. And then it also provides a benchmark for employment as well as public finance. And it classifies their powers, their organization, and their activities. And it looks at the relationships between the financial or fiscal relationships between governments. So say from the federal government, Chair McDonald, what you were talking about earlier in terms of that, that federal funding that comes through to states or to more localized governments, such as counties or even to cities and municipalities. And it's a really great survey. It covers all governments except for tribal governments. And so in conversations that some of our staff have had with the U.S. Census Bureau, the question has been, well, why haven't tribes been included in this? And the question is, we don't know. We don't have the capacity to do that. We don't have the know-how to do that. So with the Center for Indian Country Development, we actually think that this is something, we have some curiosity around in terms of where this is the data gap that we're talking about. So we took the Census of Governments and worked with an accounting firm that has done quite a bit of work with tribal governments in terms of their financial statements, tribal government accounting, to compare the Census of Governments to something that could be comparable for tribal governments, because the nomenclature is not necessarily the same. So we developed a pilot survey that will be in collaboration with tribal governments. And our goal is really to provide the tribes with the data that they need to be able to evaluate their finances in relation to those of other governments and to look and see where there's opportunities or challenges. So in terms of timeframes, we've looked at 2019 because this seems to be maybe the most recent normal period of financial activity for tribes and really for all governments, honestly, with the pandemic. And as Casey mentioned, the Minneapolis Federal Reserve ends in .org. Our domain names end in .org because we're not government. So we have secure data and data collection and handling procedures. The Federal Reserve handles some of the most sensitive data sets in terms of how we can perform our analysis for the Federal Open Market Committee, as well as other functions of regulation and supervision and credit. And I just wanted to point out, and I'm going to go back to it, but we also developed a principles for research and data use that really looks at honoring tribal data sovereignty and governance. And it is on just a couple slides back. I'm going to make you all seasick by going back and forth. But if you look on the left-hand side of this slide, this is published on our website. This was developed in collaboration with the Leadership Council, the tribal leaders, as well as really experts across Indian country, to look at how we can approach our data and research as well as policy work. And so those principles for research and data use are really developed with tribal governments in mind and protecting that tribal sovereignty and that data sovereignty. So we're hoping to be able to do with this project is to be able to provide a customized analysis and report of the data that's been collected to tribal governments that compares their finances in relation to other governments that we had mentioned, to local and state governments, for their exclusive use. And if we can get high enough response rate across the tribes in Montana to be able to ensure confidentiality, we think that we can provide a comparison of tribal governments' results with a summary of the aggregated results of across all tribal participants. And the idea is that we will pilot this in Montana and then move, to a wider stage after we work through this period of the pilot phase. So that pilot phase for Montana actually looks like us meeting with tribes over the month of June to discuss the survey and establish a primary survey respondent. We're thinking that this would probably be a tribal government's finance staff, or the treasurer position, the comptroller, the CFO, or a combination thereof, because these are questions that look at revenues and expenditures. And we are hoping to field the survey between July 10th and August 25th. I shouldn't say we hope to, we are fielding the survey through July 10th through August 5th. And we'll be doing one-on-one follow-up and technical assistance with the primary and the primary survey responded through the point of contact and the folks associated with that to help tribes complete the survey. And then over the late summer to fall, we would do the survey cleaning, coding, and analysis. All of that data needs to be analyzed and made sure that it's actually saying what it was intended to say. And then over the course of fall to winter, we would provide a preliminary individual data analysis to tribes and to also debrief on the survey with tribes to make sure that we're making improvements to the project. And then after that preliminary data analysis, we would actually provide a custom report and share those with individual tribes. And then we would wrap up the fall and winter with a pilot project evaluation.
So that's a whole lot of information on the survey and sort of what we're trying to accomplish. I think maybe to boil it down is essentially having comprehensive data in the hands of tribal leaders where they can understand sort of how they compare in terms of revenues and expenditures. I think one of the things that, having worked nationally in Indian country with a lot of policymakers, one of the things that I know is not understood is the unique ways in which tribal governments care for their communities. And there's no data that we all know the story. You guys live it every single hour in tribal council of all the things that you're doing for our membership and for our broader community. But there's no way to tell that story through data across Indian country. And that's one of the things we're really hoping to be able to sort of dispel a whole bunch of the myths that exist around Indian country of resources go into tribes and they spend them on whatever reasons. You know, if successful, we can say, look, tribes are spending 15% of their resources on cultural revitalization, language revitalization, on education. And that is double what other governments spend their money on their constituents. And there's a ton of different through lines I think that we could talk about and learn from in the survey. And then ultimately, Heather mentioned the previous initiatives that CSKT has participated around data and the Reservation Economic Analysis Project. The one thing that just jumped out at me the most when Heather and I worked on it with all the tribes in the state was the number was $973 million annually between 2003 and 2009 it eventually made its way into the state's economy because tribes are located here. 973 million. And oftentimes when making decisions, particularly at the legislative level, that stat was not there. And I think when that data analysis, the data was collected and analyzed, it was just an incredibly powerful tool that allowed folks like Senator Morjo and the Montana Indian Caucus to be able to say, hey, look through data, actually, we are contributing in incredibly meaningful ways. And I think it sort of helped to change a bit of the narrative in Helena. In addition to changing the narrative in and among tribes about sort of sharing best practices about how to support their communities and raise revenues. So this larger survey of Native nations will get to that at the national level. And I would share just one more anecdote. At the beginning of the pandemic, I was sent over to the U.S. Department of Treasury for a 6-month detail, and I was charged with the $20 billion for tribal governments to figure out how to allocate those resources to 574 tribes. And I can tell you that was a particularly difficult 6 months, and it was made more difficult because there is no data across tribes to be able to make those precise and equitable funding decisions at the federal level. And we feel that the survey of Native nations, once we roll out Montana and then beyond, will position tribes in a place to be able to say, look at the data. You know, there's always going to be some sort of economic challenge that we face. And having that data at our collective disposal, I think, is going to position tribes to have maybe increase access to additional resources that we may need from federal governments, from non-governmental partners, state houses, et cetera. So we're particularly excited about this project, particularly excited to be here with you all. As Heather mentioned, we're meeting with all the tribes in Montana. This is our first meeting. We want to start with CSKT, and we really look forward to your participation, and love to have any questions about the survey that you might have. And certainly we have a meeting to talk a little bit in more depth with the finance team as well about the sort of idiosyncrasies of the survey.
Oh, Chair, I did also want to mention that in your folders, and I think Casey mentioned this earlier, there's a one-page overview of the Survey of Native Nations. So at a really high level, it describes the project. There's also a frequently asked questions document that we came up with. So, you know, I encourage everyone to take a look at that. Just in terms of any sort of specific questions that you might have about the survey. And then we've also included a PDF copy of the survey. So this will actually roll out digitally through a Qualtrics platform. We worked with a team of Qualtrics experts within the Federal Reserve System to help us develop the survey and test it. And so this is a PDF copy of that survey. So certainly something, I think, to dig down into the details in terms of what kinds of questions we're asking in this survey.
For Casey or Heather? In working with Native Americans in philanthropy, the ignorance out there of people with money not knowing about Indian country, or the exact issues or conflicts or poverty in Indian country, and it's just not on their radar. I mean, they know nothing about it, and so you wonder why there isn't more giving by these large donors to Indian country. Well, it's simply because it's ignorance, or the proximity and the location of Indian reservations is not where they live. It's not where they visit. It's not in their bandwidth, I guess. So certainly this kind of data might help with that particular edification of those folks. It can be a two-way street. So I want to make sure that I could see where, and pick on poor Shane. Shane, thank you again for the epic battle at Helena you went through. But in that particular comment by the elected official up north in Kalispell, Regier, it was Regier. Those are like ghettos, and you do away with them. And I think responding to that here's the economic success story, or here's that. But again, when I think about those folks, they would just turn around the other way. Well, you don't need anything then. It's just like it could go both ways, and I always worry about that. Our folks that would be involved with this would be Gregory Spar. Yep. And Greg, do you have any concerns or issues with participating in the survey? Can we actually is there secret and confidential economic things that we want to keep internally only?
Morning. So my initial response is we have a meeting set with this team here in the next hour to talk with them specifically and directly about what their ask is going to be. And I think that your expectation from the council level would be for for me to come back. I've invited Wanda, our controller's assistant, to join us, and we'll come back with some high-level questions and perspective from a confidentiality perspective and some feedback from that meeting. We'll be able to provide that to you by the end of day today.
Good. Any other comments from council?
And I look forward to, we look forward to kind of diving a little bit deeper on the survey and answering any of the questions the team may have. I wanted to just note one last thing, and it's the last slide in the deck. There's an incredible opportunity, and the Center for Indian Country Development has has been bringing principal leaders from around the country, around the Federal Reserve, into Indian country to really understand, to get to understand our tribal communities and what's working and how to continue to expand economic prosperity in Indian country. And essentially the second in command of the entire Federal Reserve System, Vice Chair Michael Barr, is interested in coming out to Montana at the end of August. And he's head of all the supervision and regulation function across the entire Federal Reserve System. Again, he works right alongside Jay Powell, who is the Board of Governors chair. And he wanted to come out to Montana. We are hoping that we might be able to work with Confederate Salish and Kootenai tribes to have him in the community for meeting with the tribal council, as well as kind of meeting some of the tribal leaders in the community, perhaps Energy Keepers and SNK Electronics, to get a sense of how CSKT has been but both successful, but also some of the continuing challenges economically for CSKT. He's also interested in having a conversation with Blackfeet. So Heather and I are sort of charged with sort of making the connections, and we would hope that CSKT might be able to entertain welcoming the second in command of the Federal Reserve to our community.
Well, I think, Casey, we're always interested in doing that. It's always in our best interest to do that. So we would look forward to that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll follow up with the team with additional details.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you again. I know how busy your time is, and I know how busy your council schedule was today, having worked hard to try to get on it. So thank you all. Look forward to engaging with the rest of the team on these two issues, and thankful for the partnership.
Thank you, Casey, and good to meet you, Heather. I don't know if I met you before or not, but
I don't think.
yeah, it's good to meet you.
Thank you.
Jane?
Goes up in the minutes.
Mr.
You want
Chairman,
to,
council
so
members,
the smartest, tallest, best looking?
Just favorite.
Favorite, okay.
That'll get their goat.
I don't know if anyone remembers, Casey Lozar was on a state championship basketball team in Tolson, so I like to embarrass him with that every time I can. Not embarrass him, but he was a stellar athlete, of course. But just a quick thought, Mr. Chairman, looking at the team he's assembled, he's obviously pulled some of the best folks in Montana into his team there, especially some of the folks I've seen work in Helena. But my only other thought on the data is one of the things that we try to be careful on is, and I'm sure you all are mindful of this, is, putting that data together and then people using that in a way to undermine tribes, to say, we don't have these obligations for, whether it's revenue sharing or, things that the chairman and other council members have mentioned, or obligations for treaty obligations. And so we're always trying to be mindful of that, because I think CSKT obviously does a lot of great work on a lot of various levels, but we're always trying to make sure people are upholding their obligations and not taking that particular data and using it against tribes to say, oh, you guys are doing great. Why would we fund, this, chip in on this funding that Tom mentioned earlier, when we were having a different discussion on the federal government and obligations to possibly pull in funding for the lake and other resources. So I guess that's just, I'd be curious to see what your guys' thoughts are on that and how you all kind of manage that piece of things to make sure that doesn't happen.
Thank you, Shane. That's a really good question, and that is probably we've probably spent 80% of our time on this project thinking through that exact question. There's a long history of data being weaponized against tribes, and the center wants nothing to do with that, of course. And that is why we've spent the last couple of years working with tribal leaders around the country to develop these research and data use guidelines that are built on the care principles that stem from UNDRIP, as well as stem from feedback from tribes all around the country. And the very top of that is do no harm. That's the number one thing that, sort of the guiding filter for any of the projects that we do, keeping data in aggregate. If there's any sort of analysis that's published, that we get approval from participating tribes. And so there's these number of sort of sideboards that we can put in place to ensure that we're safeguarding the exact questions, the exact things that could happen if data is in the wrong hands. And we, this is probably the one thing that keeps me up the most, other than my kids, at night. And we have assembled sort of the strategies to be able to protect data. And it's what we do. Heather mentioned it. For us to be able to, at the Federal Reserve level, to be able to set inflation rates that impacts every family in this country, we have to have very confidential data that we protect and we control and that we analyze every 6 weeks when we go to the Federal Open Market Committee. And that is part of the Federal Reserve's DNA. There's countless data sets that we have that have proprietary information that we just have a best practice over the last 102 years of protecting. And that's just what we have to do, because if there is any mistake, it'll affect the nation's economy and the global economy. So the Center for Indian Country Development is embedded in those sort of data governance principles all around the Federal Reserve System to make sure that we can protect any of the data that we have. Any confidential data, any data that is deemed confidential by tribes will be protected by the Center for Indian Country Development. And we just happen to have the infrastructure to do that sort of off the start.
Thank you, Casey. I just want to elaborate a little bit more on what Shane said, and he was talking about kind of outside the tribal circle, whether that be the BIA and tribal associations or whatever that may be. Internally, one of the things is that, and I think you brought this up when you had your $20 million trying to figure out how to divvy that out to 500 plus some tribes. There was no information to help you do that. It's one of the critical things in drafting a couple of different legislations to try to deal with that issue of the federal excise sport taxes was, it's not right to have tribes compete against each other. And so I wouldn't want to see any of this data be used in that way, shape, or form, because that's the exact same thing, but it's in the House, what Shane was talking about. And so really, I mean, we want to have a, equal, but when you start competing against other tribes, one tribe is more successful, and so, well, we're not going to give them any more because they're successful. No, that's not the way it's supposed to work, and so that would be something it's fearful for me internally for within the tribal circle is that, and so we want to be able to support all tribes the same way and not have competitive funding issues. And it's not that way for so much funding that comes from the federal government. And so it shouldn't be that way for Indian tribes. And so hopefully this data won't be used in that way to penalize us.
The PDF is? You said you had the PDF of the survey available?
Not have the PDF of the survey? Okay. We'll make sure you get that.
Thank you, Heather. Casey, thank you. MJ. You know, that's awful big for Shane to highlight Polson being the state championship, being a Ronan guy that got second. There's people are always high grading good players from Ronan. Yep. Is that it? Break for lunch?
1:30?
You guys are ready for your questions and everything at one?
Everybody look at the revised questions. They're okay.
I did. I wanted to make a suggestion on the very first
You guys are
question.
in open right now.
Oh, okay.
Okay, let's go into executive.